Something called the Danish twin study established that only about 10% of how long the average person lives within certain biological limits is dictated by our genes. The other 90% or so is dictated by our lifestyle and our environment. So the premise of the blue zones, and hence this talk, is if you can optimize your lifestyle and environment, you have a de facto formula for longevity. You also, as it turns out, have an antidote for about the $1.3 trillion we spend a year on chronic disease. But where do you find such a formula? Well, we started where most people start, by looking at academic institutions and reading papers. But you find that every once in a while, those papers refute themselves. Remember about 15 years ago, doctors were telling menopausal women to take hormones. Well, as it turns out, 10 years later, women who took this hormone therapy have much higher rates of breast cancer, and the type of breast cancer they get is much worse. And remember about 5 years ago, vitamin E was the great panacea. You saw it in pills, and you saw it in Cheerios, and you saw it in power drinks. It was supposed to be good for your heart and your skin and to prevent cancer. Well, as it turns out, now we discover that people who take vitamin E are actually more likely to die in any given year than people who don't. So instead of looking at universities, we took a meta-analysis. I teamed up with the National Institutes on Aging and with National Geographic to spend 3 years to find the geographically defined, demographically confirmed areas in the world where people live measurably longer. These are places where people have been doing the same thing, not for decades or years, but for centuries and even millennia. And then put together a world-class team of experts who could help me go into these places and distill out what exactly is going on here. What is the lifestyle and what is the environment that seems to explain this extraordinary longevity? And indeed, we found these places where people were reaching age 100 at many times greater than America does, a fraction of the rate of chronic disease, much lower middle-age mortality. And it turns out no matter where you went, whether it was in Asia or Central America or Europe, the same 9 things were happening over and over and over again. Didn't matter where you go. I'm going to tell you what those 9 things are, but first, I want to debunk a few common myths when it comes to longevity. And the first myth is if you try really hard, you can live to 100. It's false, unfortunately. The problem is we're mammals. And whether you're a rat or an elephant or a human in between, we are not programmed for longevity. We're programmed for something called procreative success. And this is something that's not nearly as sexy as it sounds. In the hands of an evolutionary biologist, procreative success does not mean getting laid. It means getting to be a grandparent. Because when it comes to natural selection, the only traits we pass down, the only traits that cascade down the generations, are those that better the chance that our children and our children's children have children themselves. So parents have a huge influence on whether or not their children survive. And grandparents have a little influence, but by the time you're a great-grandparent, you don't have much influence on your children's survivability. So it's no coincidence that people start dying off at the age of great-grandparenthood. A 73-year-old, in fact, is aging at a rate of about 250 times faster than a 12-year-old. So to reach age 100, you not only have to have had a stellar lifestyle, you also have to have won the genetic lottery, which you can't predetermine. But wait a minute, I watch late-night TV. There's all kinds of treatments and pills and supplements and coral calcium and resveratrol I can take that will help stop, slow, or reverse aging. Well, think about that for a second. There are 99 things that can age us. Our arteries can become clogged. Our brains can become gummed up with plaque. We get Alzheimer's disease. Our skin wrinkles. Our eyesight dims. Our hearing dulls. Hair falls out. There are 30 trillion cells in our bodies. That's trillion with a T. We're talking national debt numbers here. Those cells turn themselves over once every 8 years or so. And every time they turn themselves over, they do so imperfectly. Kind of like making a cassette tape from an album and then making a second cassette tape from that first cassette tape. By the time you get 3 or 4 generations down, there's so much buildup of damage that you can barely hear that cassette tape. The same sort of thing happens with our cells. So no, there are no pills, there are no supplements, there's nothing even on the scientific horizon that's going to help us stop or reverse aging in the near future. So what's Dan Buettner standing up here for if there's nothing I can do to increase my healthy life expectancy? The best science tells us that the capacity of the human machine, my body, your body, America's body, is 90. As a species, we ought to be hitting age 90 on average. Yet life expectancy in this country is only 78. So somewhere, we're leaving on the table about 12 years of life. And research suggests that those would be good years. The average American has 3 years of something called morbidity, those disabled years at the end of your life. You'll spend about 95% of your lifelong healthcare dollars. Where I'm going to take you now, 3 of the 5 blue zones, these people are not only getting those years for the most part, but they're also doing so devoid of cancer, heart disease, and diabetes, those chronic diseases that are costing our country so much. We found our first blue zone about 200 miles off the coast of Italy on the island of Sardinia, not the entire island, just that green area. And in the green bullseye up there, we found an area, 17 villages, 42,000 people, where there are 10 times more centenarians than we have proportionally here in America. And this is a place where people are not only reaching age 100, they're doing so with extraordinary vigor and vitality. 102 still riding their bike to work. 104 still cutting wood and beating a guy 45 years younger, 65 years younger than them in an arm wrestle. So what's going on here? You actually have a Bronze Age culture that has been pushed up into the highlands of Sardinia and incubated a culture since about the time of Christ. They're largely shepherds, a job that occasioned about 6 miles of low-intensity physical activity a day, plant-based diet that hinges around a type of bread made of whole-grain durum wheat. They do eat some animal products, but they're all from grass-fed animals, high in omega-3 fatty acids. They have an amazing wine called Cananao that has at least 3 times the level of polyphenols of any other known wine in the world. And they drink this not only during meals, but also during coffee breaks and this great sort of collective happy hour they have at 5 o'clock. There's a secret there. It's also in their attitude. Old people are more revered than they are here in America. Ever notice how social capital seems to peak at about age 26 here? Look at national ads. Here, the older you get, the more important you are in the society. And to a certain extent, older people rise to the occasion. They don't feel like recipients of health care. They feel like they need to contribute. That gets them out of bed in the morning, out of the easy chair. We found our second blue zone on the other side of the planet, 800 miles south of Tokyo on the archipelago of Okinawa. And Okinawa has the longest disability-free life expectancy in the world. They have what we want. They live a very long time. They tend to be very good years. They often die in their sleep. And occasionally, I happen to know, after sex. We won't get into that, though. 7 good years longer than the average American, 5 times as many centenarians, 1/5 the rate of breast and colon cancer, and 1/6 the rate of cardiovascular disease. About 80% of people over 65 in this country will die of one of the diseases in these 2 risk factor clusters. And the fact that this culture is yielding these numbers, I assert, suggests something we have to learn from them. What are they doing? Plant-based diet. Not to say they don't eat meat, but they eat very little of it. At least 8 times as much tofu as we do in America. And like these Sardinians, their lives are mostly engaged in agricultural endeavors. They kind of have to depend on themselves for most of their work. More so than what they eat, what they don't eat, before every meal, they will intone a 2,500-year-old Confucian adage, hara hachi bu, reminding them to stop eating when their stomach is 80% full. It seems like, well, big deal, but if Americans could do that, we could eat McDonald's and fast food and junk food, and we would lose, on average, about 17 pounds a year. And at a very early age, they form these committed clusters they call moais. About a half a dozen young people commit for life. And if things go well, you have to share it with your moai. If things go poorly, a child gets sick, a parent dies, you get divorced, you can always count on your moai. And I show this picture because these 4 ladies here have been in the same moai for the past 97 years. They're 102. They get together every night, drink sake, gossip, argue about who that hot guy liked best back in 1942. But they're also there in very real and intangible ways when it comes to supporting each other in ways of a social network. The word retirement does not exist in the Okinawan vocabulary. Instead, the word ikigai imbues your entire adult life. That's why a 102-year-old karate master keeps getting up every morning to teach karate. And this 96-year-old fisherman fishes for his family every single day, brings it to one of each of his 3 children and their children. 95, he's still in very good shape. Finally, we explored America's Blue Zone, about 100 miles southeast of Los Angeles, down the San Bernardino Freeway. You get off at the Loma Linda exit, and the first thing you see is a Del Taco and a Wiener Hut, and you're in America's Blue Zone. But what's happening here is you have the highest percentage of Seventh-day Adventists in the world. Adventists are conservative Methodists who distinguish themselves from other Christians largely in that they make a huge commitment to health and they go to church on Saturdays. So if you look at Adventists, you see something pretty incredible. The National Institutes on Health have been following Adventists for about 30 years, about 60,000 of them. You look at life expectancy of women in this country, it's about 80, but life expectancy for men is 9 years longer, about 89. And I'm sorry, for women. And for men, the difference is even more pronounced. Adventist men are living about 11 years longer than their North American counterpart. Is this genetic? No. You look at an Adventist congregation, they're white, they're black, they're Hispanic, they're Asian. They're doing a few things differently from the rest of us. First of all, they take this idea of Sabbath very seriously. From sunset on Friday until sunset on Saturday, no matter how busy they are, no matter where the kids need to be driven, they stop everything and they focus on their God, they focus on their support network, and in the afternoon, hardwired right in their scriptures, is a nature walk, evolution of which has changed the definition a little bit over time, but nevertheless, they get out every Saturday afternoon. They take their diet directly from the Bible. Genesis chapter 1, verse 26, where God talks about seeds and grains, and one stanza later, she talks about green plants. Ostensibly missing for the 3rd blue zone in a row, meat. They also hang out with other Adventists. And if you go to an Adventist party, you don't see people swilling bourbon or smoking a bong. They have potluck exchanges. They support each other in difficult times. They plan their Saturday walks. This is a culture that has yielded Ellsworth Wareham, multi-millionaire who still insists on doing his own yard work. After 3 days of it, he ends up, perhaps predictably, in the operating room, but not as the patient, but as the open-heart surgeon, 97 years old. Ed Rawlings, 105, he's still a working cowboy. He gets up every morning and takes a swim, and on the weekends he likes to put on the boards, do some water skiing. And then Marge Deton, who wakes up each morning, pumps iron, gets on her bicycle, and then she jumps in her 1994 root beer-colored Cadillac Seville, where she barrels down the San Bernardino Freeway and continues to volunteer for 7 different organizations. 105 years old, just turned 105. So, what do these places have in common? If you look at all of these cultures, you see the 9 things happening over and over again. And I break them down into 4 different categories. And the first category is physical activity. I'm about to utter a heresy here. Exercise does not work. If you look at these spry centenarians, none of them ran marathons or read Shape magazine or participated belonged to a gym. But they all lived in environments that constantly nudged them into physical activity. They lived in towns and villages where they walked to their friend's house, walked to the grocery store, walked to church. They all had gardens, which nudged them out into the yard year-round for the most part. We figure they burned probably an extra 500 calories a day without even thinking about it. The next category is the right outlook. downshifting. You tell people you found blue zones in the South Pacific or the Mediterranean, and people say, sure. If I live in a place like that, I wouldn't have any stress. I'd live a long time too. But these people worry about the same things we do. They worry about their health. They worry about their children. They worry about their finances. In fact, they're poorer people than we are. But what they have that we don't have are mechanisms to shed that stress every day. The Okinawans have ancestor veneration. The Adventists have prayer. And the Sardinians just have a happy hour, but that works too. They have purpose right in their vocabulary. You know, the two most dangerous years in your life is the year you're born, because of infant mortality, you can't do much about that, and the year you retire. There's a threefold spike in mortality the year you retire. Is that because of the wild retirement party? I doubt it. No, I think what happens when you retire, you lose that work-given sense of purpose that gets you out of bed, out of the easy chair every morning, gets you to take your medicines, do your exercise, etc. When it comes to eating, you don't see diets per se. People do drink in most of the blue zones, 1 to 2 drinks a day. And no, you can't save up all week long and have 14 on Saturday. They eat largely a plant-based diet. It doesn't mean they don't eat meat, but meat is always a celebratory food or a condiment, kind of the sideshow on the plate. We figure about 2 servings, about the size of a deck of cards. What you see in blue zone diets throughout the world are beans and nuts. And indeed, one big study shows that people who eat nuts, about 2 ounces a day, 4 times a week, live 2 to 3 years longer than people who don't eat nuts. And then finally, they have all kinds of strategies to keep from overeating. You know, we're marketed the idea all the time that the secret to health is we can eat our way to health. Well, we've eaten ourselves way past health in this country. The secrets, I think, are setting up your eating environment so you're nudged away from food. This idea of hara hachibu that the Okinawans do, pre-plating the food at the counter instead of eating family style. And it turns out that people who eat a large breakfast counterintuitively, proteins and fats and fruits and vegetables, actually consume fewer calories throughout the day than those who start their day with a breakfast bar. And then finally, the foundation on which all of this rests is how we connect. We know that people who live in strong families, what I mean by this, keeping your aging parent nearby. It's worth 2 to 4 years of extra life expectancy for that parent. Taking care of your children, investing in a spouse. Married people outlive unmarried people in every respect. That will add another 3 to 4 years of life expectancy. Longest lived people in the world, and I interviewed 250, all belong to a faith-based community. Doesn't matter if you're Christian or Muslim or Jewish or maybe even a good atheist. But we know people who participate 4 times a month live 40 to 14 years longer than people who don't. And then finally, surround yourself with the right people. And if you remember one thing from this talk, remember this. We know from the Framingham studies, if your 3 best friends are obese, there's a 150% better chance that you'll be obese. If your friends smoke, your 3 best friends, there's a 60% better chance that you smoke. If your friends are unhappy, even if your friends are lonely, that behavior is contagious as well. So the strategy here is to think about who you're spending Tuesday nights with. Do you hang out with somebody who sits on the couch, eats Doritos, and watches reruns of Leave It to Beaver? Or do you hang out with somebody who bikes or gardens or bowls or walks or engages in things like the UP conference? It has a huge impact because friends tend to be long-term adventures. Pills and supplements, even if they do work, we stop taking them, research shows, after about 9 months on average. So you can believe the secrets of the world's longest-lived people, or you can take the advice of Marge Jatan, the 105-year-old who still drives around in a Cadillac. I spent days with her interviewing her, and at the very end of it, I said, Marge, do you have any wisdom for the rest of us who might want to live to 105 years old? And she put her head down and she thought for a moment, and she looked up and she said, well, if you start to feel like you're going to die, don't. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Dan, that was terrific. One question, something that struck me as interesting about what you said is that the social context in these blue zones gives veneration to the elderly and so on. So it made me wonder if in America, if our medical research continues to scream forward and we solve a lot of these health problems and extend people's lifespan a long way, are we going to also have to change the social context in such a way such that they're not marginalized at 110 years old?
Well, you look at mammals, and the mammals that survive the best tend to have grandparents that help raise the young. So there's one cue for us. Also, the older people who make you think that if we have too many centenarians, we're going to bankrupt the Social Security system. But it turns out it costs a lot less for a society to reach for people to reach age 100 because they tend to be contributing longer, and they also have a much lower chance of getting chronic disease. Chronic diseases are hugely expensive. So the people who are dying at age 60 are the ones who are dying of expensive diseases like heart disease, cancer, and diabetes.
That's right. You essentially want to last to the end and then drop off the cliff
that's right.
quickly. That's right. Okay, another hand for Dan. Thank you so much.